All right, great. And with that, I'm excited to be joined by our panel on inclusive design today. So we'll start with a land acknowledgement from Alexis, and then the panelists will have a quick introduction of themselves. So Alexis, off to you next.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I want to start with a land acknowledgement to raise awareness of the harm and erasure done to the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, also known as North America. Today, this event acknowledges that we occupy the following unceded ancestral lands of the following tribes: Mississauga of the Credit, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Ohlone and Ramaytush, Southern Pomo and Kashaya, Arapaho and Hinono'eno, Duwamish, Munsee Lenape, and Canarsie. To find out what native land you occupy, visit native-land.ca. You can also research topics like the Land Back movement and missing murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people. If you're financially able, please pay your local tribes a land tax, such as the Shumi land tax for the Bay Area and real rent Duwamish for the Seattle area. With that, hi everyone. Again, my name is Alexis Lucio. I use she, they pronouns, and I spend my work week as a senior accessibility designer at GitHub. A few points about me. I am a queer Latinx femme by way of Mexico. And I'm really excited to share this stage with some great folks. It's going to be exciting and fun, just like the floral dress that I'm wearing today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna E. Cook. I also use she, her, or they, them pronouns. Either is okay with me. I am a senior designer at Microsoft. I started last week, so really exciting times. I am also a graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder Atlas, focusing on inclusive and accessible design. I've got 2 cats. I always warn folks before I get started, and they might show up. Today, I'm wearing a black shirt with a moon necklace. I've got strawberry blonde hair, white skin, and blue eyes, and I'm excited to be here today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shell Little. I use she, her pronouns. I am an independent consultant, accessibility specialist, and inclusive design leader. I'm currently on burnout sabbatical right now, so I am doing a lot of speaking, and that's pretty much it. In a previous life, I've held titles such as inclusive design lead, head of mobile accessibility, and inclusive design lead of the design system and framework. So a lot of titles, but yeah, I'm excited to be here. I have short rainbow hair. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and I am a white woman with gray-green eyes. And yeah, I'm pumped to be here on the panel with such wonderful humans.
Hey everyone, my name is Tolu. I'm a product designer. My pronouns are she, her, or they. I live in Toronto and I currently work as a product designer at Meta. I also like to think of myself as an inclusive design advocate and a bit of a web accessibility nerd. I'm super excited to be here. A little bit about what I look like. I'm a Black woman. I am African. I have shoulder length black hair. I wear giant black rimmed glasses, and I'm wearing a black dress. I think most of us are wearing black, actually. Interesting designer moment there. Yeah, excited to have this chat with you all today.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. So now I'd like to move us on into the heart of it, the panel. I'd love to start us by focusing on thinking about accessibility in relation to just how one does one's work. Then I'll move us into talking about being product designers focused on accessibility. And finally on the panel, we'll discuss some of the nuances and in between of the work. But for the first chunk, let's talk about what it means to do inclusive design. I would love to start by passing it off to the panel to describe the concept called shift left. Shell, would you mind getting us started?
Yeah, absolutely. I think shift left is a great place to start when we're thinking about how we should be talking and thinking about inclusive design. So the concept of shift left is the idea that we should be engaging with accessibility specialists, earlier in the product life cycle. So, as far back as, should we be making this product? Is this the right product we should be making? Are these products that we're making going to service the people we want it to? And asking ourselves the question, are we comfortable excluding anyone on purpose? Because some things, children should be excluded from certain things. Exclusion isn't a bad thing as long as it's done by choice. And that's what we're trying to help break down, is exclusion that's done not by choice, done by not asking the right questions, not asking the right people. So we like to use a lot of analogies. And with shift left, we like to think about cooked in, not caked on. If you're making a blueberry cake, you can't slap blueberry on top and call it a blueberry cake. It'd be a blueberry topped cake. So we think about making sure that the accessibility is mixed into every portion. And when we're talking about design, there's a lot of stuff that preludes QA. So when we're talking about that, shifting left, that's what we're thinking about, making sure, we have accessibility in the design process, in the research process, and moving forward through, wireframing and so on. So yeah, I think it's a great place to get us going on what inclusive design even is. So yeah, passing the mic.
Yeah, I love that thought of how do we work with other people as we're building to make sure we're doing the right things. I think next it could be fun to talk about, as we're shifting left to include collaborating, working with more people to build inclusive products. Who else, what other roles are just sort of coming into being a part of that process? Anna, I was hoping maybe you could talk to us some about just sort of like, how are you just sort of working on that shift left? What other functions are you working with? How does accessibility touch things like UX and content design?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to accessibility, it's everyone's job in a product to think about accessibility and inclusion. And, earlier accessibility efforts were so focused on QA because folks were trying to prove that these issues were existing. And so shift left is all about moving left backwards, right, through the process, so that we're actually thinking about strategy, as Shell touched on. And so when we talk about roles that should be thinking about accessibility, the long answer short is all roles in our teams should be thinking about that. And so when it comes to thinking about accessibility and inclusion in those perspectives, we need product managers and product owners to ask, what are we building? Why are we building it? When are we building it? And the users that we're serving, right? But we also, when it comes to like accessibility, so much of the responsibility can fall into that side of things, right? We have, around 67% of accessibility issues and inclusion related concerns originating in design. And so for like example, we can make something like a carousel, right? Technically meet WCAG 2.1 AA conformance, but that doesn't make it a good experience, and it doesn't make it holistically accessible or inclusive or meaningful, right? So barriers are not just created in something in how it works, right? It's not just created when we're developing something. They're created when we are communicating and in how we are communicating. Now, that carousel is an easy example of that, right? But like designers have so much that we do that impacts accessibility, right? The accessibility comes up in visual design, it comes up in interaction design, it comes up for content design. So like, for example, what inputs are we putting on form fields? Are those inputs clear from the input label alone, or do we need associated help text? Are we using disabled buttons, and how are those creating barriers, right? Because those rely a lot on visual interactions alone, where we need it to be keyboard accessible, we need it to be screen reader accessible, and we need it to make sense, right? So there's many interactions like these that come up in a lot of different parts of our process and flow that we need to be thinking about earlier, so that we're not just stacking in a bunch of like aria, right, to make things quote unquote work. So it's kind of there's so much that we can do and so much better we can do. And I'll hand it back.
Do folks have some just sort of like examples of just sort of ways they've pulled in just sort of different roles as part of that process, or just sort of just any roles in particular they've just been interested to work with as a part of their inclusive design process?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Anna, in that I think accessibility is like everyone's responsibility on the team. It doesn't just start and end with designers and developers. I think if we take steps back, I love to talk to folks, even like in recruitment, for example, about accessibility. Making sure that the portals through which people apply for jobs is accessible is really important, because otherwise you might not get anyone with disabilities working with you if your application process is not accessible. Talking to PMs is really great, making sure that the like strategies we're identifying, the OKRs, the metrics that we're measuring are like valuable when it comes to accessibility. But I genuinely believe that anyone you work with on your team has a role to play when it comes to like making an inclusive and accessible workplace.
Totally agree, Tolu. And one example from a past employer that I really loved was a doc writer came up to me and said, hey, like when we're looking at a breadcrumb component and we have these characters, what is the impact of different characters on a screen reader? Are these things even announced? Are they announced in a way that it's not great? Have we even looked at this? And this was pretty early on in my accessibility career. And I was like, that's a great question that I didn't consider. And we ended up going through, a bit of exploration, a bit of testing. We talked to folks who use screen readers, and we were able to make the best product decision that, maybe to someone who doesn't use assistive technology or is able-bodied wouldn't make a difference to them, or they wouldn't even think about. But it's because everyone has some responsibility to creating accessible products, we should also acknowledge as designers that if it comes from a different person, it still is of equal value. I think oftentimes in the product development lifecycle, there definitely is a hierarchy. And so things can be dismissed just because someone doesn't have designer in their title. But we need to trust each other's expertise. And that docs writer is still someone who, I worked with throughout my career.
Really, really cool example. Thank you for that. One of many reasons I was so excited for this panel is just how many different, just sort of how much thought there is around different identities and intersectionality. Just sort of a big topic, but I'm hoping to dive into just sort of the relationship between inclusive design and accessibility. Just sort of maybe Tolu, you can start us off by speaking about this relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone in the chat actually gave us a great segue. They had a comment about us like having descriptions of ourselves at the beginning of this chat. And this is a conversation I see like happening repeatedly in the accessibility, inclusive design community. And one thing I think about really often when we're in these spaces is how just like many other spaces in tech, like this space is overwhelmingly white and male. And it's our job to think about people of different identities when we come into these spaces. So when it comes to things like describing like someone's appearance or describing race in alternative text attributes, I think it's so important to bring that to the conversation. We live in a society that tends to see white as the default. I live in a country in Canada where most people are white. It's so important to challenge these assumptions by describing what people look like and just making sure that we don't kind of assume that people are white by default and that we're not in turn like bringing these assumptions to blind people, for example. We need to like give full context, the full stories around what we're doing. And yeah, I think that's really important. And I think challenging assumptions like that is how we make design more inclusive and how we remind people that like, we exist, we're here.
And, to add on to that, something that I use, because this question comes up a lot, right? Like, what is the relationship between accessibility design and inclusive design? And I tell folks that accessibility is a solution to the umbrella practice of inclusive design. And it's a great solution to jump in, or a great part to jump into, because traditionally, historically, disabled people have been marginalized. There's been a lot of violence, exclusion from these folks. And Tolu and I were discussing this recently. it can be very difficult to talk about accessibility and inclusive design if that's the only lens that we're looking from in terms of marginalization and exclusion. I'll give you an example. If I'm working with a fellow inclusive designer or practitioner, and this person is misogynistic, this person is racist, this person is xenophobic, or hopefully you're not ableist as an accessibility practitioner. That's a big oxymoron, but sometimes it happens. I can't really speak to this person about things like the gender wage gap, the race wage gap. And if I can't talk to you about those things, it can be really hard to convince you or to hold a conversation with you that, yeah, a Black disabled person has less income than a white disabled person. Or when we think about another example, accessibility, right? The key word in that is access. And Shell brought up a great comment before the webinar started that you can have a panel that's free and have a lot more people come to it because it is free. It's not hundreds of dollars, right? And there's a lot of gatekeeping in the design industry if folks want to get in and don't have a traditional education, which 4-year college, there's a whole other conversation about that in terms of elitism and cost. But we need to do our due diligence as, if we call ourselves inclusive designers, inclusive practitioners, to also look at these other elements. You can't look at, disability in a vacuum. You also have to look at race, gender, sexual orientation. Like a Black trans person is going to typically have less income and less resources than a Black cisgender disabled person. And I wish that we would look at these lenses a lot more and consider them a lot more.
Thank you so much for saying that. And just to add to that, I think one thing that really hurts my heart sometimes in the accessibility community is how willing we are to talk about issues when it comes to accessibility, but it can be so difficult to see the intersection of these things. We hear a lot when it comes to issues affecting someone who might be white and disabled, but when someone gets shot on the street and happens to be a disabled person, do we hear as much happening? The reality is that none of our identities exist in a vacuum. Most of the Black people who are unarmed, who are gunned down by police, are disabled people. And if we don't have conversations about these things, then we really are neglecting a huge portion of the disabled community. And I think at the core of what we do, we need to realize that the reason we work in this field, the reason this field exists, is because we're trying to restore a civil right to disabled people. Accessibility is a civil right, just like racial equality is a civil right, just like not being discriminated against when it comes to your gender or sexual orientation is a civil right. And I think that as accessibility practitioners, we really need to grapple with those things. And I deeply believe that it is our job to make sure that we're giving as much attention to these intersecting identities as we are to identities that are maybe a little bit more relatable to us. And if we don't do that, we really aren't doing our jobs.
And I want to throw in here, Tolu wrote a fantastic article on alt text and descriptions like this. And I just want to call that out because I think it's one of the best references I've seen in one of the best articles, at least in this year, if not beyond. And so shout out to both, to everyone talking about this, but also read that article. I will share it on Twitter later.
I think just to maybe wrap up this little section, thank you, Alexis and Tolu, so much for all of that. I think, as somebody who is, a white person and it's about using my privilege, I will say, if these subjects make you feel icky and uncomfortable and you are an accessibility specialist, I think you have a lot to unpack. I don't think you can do your job as an inclusive designer if what Tolu said and what Alexis said makes you want to turn off this this webinar. I think if you are struggling that much with the concept of privilege and the concept of, there's different stacked privileges and we need to talk about the intersectionality of all of them. I think it's time to reevaluate what you're doing, because I think a lot of times we do incredible disservice to accessibility when we're not thinking about the intersectionality. And I would go as far to say that I know it's a bit extreme, but what we're talking about today is so critical for, accessibility and especially for inclusive design, because inclusive design is rooted in disability, but it spreads beyond that to all different facets of human, human beings. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in there before we move on.
Amazing answers and teaching from you all. Thank you so much for sharing just sort of such hard work that just has such impact on what we end up building together too. Appreciate it. I'm going to pull us into a next round of topics. I think a great way to kick off would be chatting about how we can advocate for accessibility in different ways from different perspectives. I'd love to hear from each of you how you approach the work. Anna, I might pick you to start. Can you tell me about some of the differences between what product design is, accessibility design, how you do your work in practice?
Totally. And so I have opinions, right, on this topic. I think that we're all gonna have some pretty cool opinions on this one, but I think a lot of the time I hear folks saying things like every designer should be an accessibility designer. And I've, in organizations, there are folks who kind of have this perception that every product designer can bring that in. But I think that it's important to understand that there's a difference between product designers and accessibility / inclusive designers. And the real reason we need to clarify that is because we need people to go beyond basic understandings of accessibility. So when we say, like, when folks say we believe, or they believe that every designer should be an inclusive designer, I think what they, well, I don't want to say what I think they mean. What I expect out of a product designer is that they know accessibility is important, that they're regularly checking their work, and they know when to ask questions and when to go beyond the basics, right? When to get support and help, knowing what tools to use and when. But the problem with expecting every designer to bring an accessibility advanced practice to the table is, I think it's a little misguided. A lot of designers right now, especially, most designers don't have even basic accessibility education built into their practice. And so to say everyone should be able to do this is ignoring the state of the industry as it is, and ignoring the amount of responsibilities that we have as designers in the first place. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be thinking about accessibility as designers in the first place. It's to say we need the basics across the board, and then we need folks like accessibility and inclusive designers to go beyond those basics and help support product designers in their roles, to support those questions. And so accessibility designers, in my opinion, and I'd love to hear what the others have to say too, because this is a developing understanding and definition. We are there to answer advanced questions, right? Going beyond how do you check color contrast, or even when you need to check color contrast. I know I brought it up, I'm sorry. And then, going into things like, what should I be using here? Is this a good pattern to be thinking about? And then building in frameworks and tools and guides to ensure that product designers are supported, that they have everything they need to do what they can do to make things more inclusive. Inclusive designers and accessibility designers are advocating for the space and time and resources necessary to do this work. I'm going to run out of breath here because I'm so opinionated about this. But I think what we want, right? Matt May says it all the time, or I'm quoting him all the time now. We need a lot of people to know the basics and a few people to know more than the basics so we can support everyone else too. So that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, and I can definitely add on to that. Anna and I are absolutely on the same page when it comes to this stuff, where, the biggest concern we have oftentimes, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit in our debunking section, but when you have an accessibility specialist who doesn't have the room to actually do their job. Oftentimes we see people who do accessibility bogged down with responsibilities that are actually like 10 people's jobs. So when it comes to design, it is incredibly important to have people who know base level knowledge, because the biggest thing we are working through and trying to figure out solutions for is bottlenecking when it comes to accessibility knowledge, only having one keeper of all of the accessibility knowledge. It needs to be spread out for lots of people. But I think this issue and misconception we're having lately where anybody can be an inclusive designer, just like say you're an inclusive designer and read WCAG, you're good to go. It really takes away the nuances of, I think the hugest part of inclusive design for me is interaction design. What does it do? Why does it do it? When does it do it? What are the parameters for doing what's communicated? There's so much when it comes to building products. Like every little facet of a design is incredibly important, but like when it comes to my experience, and I have a lot of experience dealing with incredibly difficult accessibility problems in really niche technology, the biggest thing that we run into is no one really has the answers for a lot of these things. And you have to really, know your stuff and be able to pick through, but it requires collaboration from so much. Like, for example, I worked on a piece of software for check capture, receipt capture, due to legality things and intellectual property issues. We were unable to have auto capture anymore. So if you hold your phone above your check, there's no auto capture for you. And that's a huge accessibility feature. So how do we build that back in? And it requires legal team, content writers, inclusive designers, accessibility specialists, and then our people who work mobile and then our mobile developers. It takes a huge collaboration, but everybody on that team needs at least a base understanding of accessibility, or we're just, swimming upstream or, trudging through jello. It doesn't matter. It just isn't going to go well if you're trying to fight the base level of accessibility. So, I was lucky enough to be on a team of people who knew base level accessibility, and I didn't have to unmute to say, hey, that's an issue. And it makes a huge difference. Like the things you're able to achieve as a company, as a team, when everybody has base level accessibility knowledge is out of this world. And as someone who has experienced it, I hope to see it in more places as well.
I love that. And like, first off, +1 on my brain went a lot faster than my mouth. We're going to try this again. For me, there's an element of trust. These two positions shouldn't be vying for each other's jobs. They should work together, right? And for me, who, prior to being an accessibility designer, I was a product designer for 5 years, and I worked on developer monitoring, troubleshooting, and security tools, which are pretty complicated in terms of workflow and data visualization and all these things. And when I started working in accessibility design, what I realized is it's a relationship of trust. The product designer is trusting me to come in with information about how to make this truly the most accessible experience in terms of, I say the 3 C's, content, so like words, context, where are we in the application, and custom. So maybe there's a brand or marketing constraint, or Shell just brought up a legal constraint, which I had never heard about till today. So these are things that I need to consider to provide the good, better, best solution. And on the flip side, I expect the product designer to know the tool inside and out. What are the top workflows? Who are our users? Maybe there's a security constraint, especially in the developer tool space. We may have to hide certain information or do progressive disclosure. And, it's not possible for my brain to know all of that at once, or else I would just be like a pile of mashed potatoes on the floor at the end of the day. So I really hope that, yes, I would love for a product designer to know a little bit about accessibility. I love learning a little bit about the product, but in no ways are we responsible for both jobs and responsibilities simultaneously. The point is to work together and to have a team of specialists to create truly the best product that we can.
Tolu, do you have some thoughts on just sort of what the shape of for inclusive design is for you?
I think you folks covered most of it. The only thing that I would add is that there are so many aspects when it comes to making sure that your org is truly practicing inclusive design work. You can't just have one designer who's like a mega specialist in accessibility, like kind of driving the effort forward. It's not going to work. You need a lot of people who have a baseline knowledge, like you said, Shell, but also you need like things like incentives. Like you need there to be an incentive for someone to include this in their work. You need it to be like something that you're assessing as part of like proficiency in a person's job. It needs to be like very baked in. Just like you expect a designer to know how to use Figma and to like run design sprints, you should expect a designer to have a certain amount of accessibility knowledge, and you should also hold them accountable to do that as part of their role. But yeah, I think y'all covered pretty much everything I'd have to add.
I love that. Tolu, I like that you started to touch on just sort of what are some of the like organizational health best practices of just sort of what can be built into a company who's trying to grow their inclusive design muscles. Do any of you all have just sort of like, this is a best practice I'd really recommend for a company who's looking to grow in terms of how they do inclusive design?
Yeah, when I used to be a developer, we had tons of tools to teach us how to learn new tools. We had access to classes that would teach you how to use like React or the latest technology. I think the same should exist for companies that value accessible design, accessible development. Provide resources for your people to learn how to like doing like inclusive, accessible work. I find that so often people who are interested in this have to go out and do it on their own, but it absolutely should be something that companies and workplaces provide if they expect their people to do accessible work.
Totally. And, you know, we're coming on, it's 2022, time is a weird construct, and folks are creating a lot of courses for accessibility. So I know W3C has a free course on EDX, I believe is the platform name, and it's a really in-depth, you know, have your cup of coffee and have a good night's sleep intro class. Marcy Sutton, another A11Y femme who's awesome, came out with a 6-module course on testing, QA testing for accessibility. And there's a lot of free stuff that's coming out, which is great because we're bringing back the access to accessibility. Hopefully these things are captioned and whatnot, because that's another element. So, you know, for us, it's bringing that in and like getting groups together and just understanding that it's not only on the designer. And to Tolu's earlier point, like you can't just have one person being like, all right, org, today we're going to learn about accessibility, right? And there's little things that folks can do at every step of the way. So a resource that I recommend is, we love acronyms in A11Y. It's the Web Accessibility Initiative Accessibility Roles and Responsibilities Mapping, ARRM. It's a wiki page that you can find online, and effectively it has different job descriptions and responsibilities that are based on the product development lifecycle and what those folks can do to introduce more inclusive practices. So something that I found really helpful, especially in working with folks who are not in the same time zone, is putting accessibility acceptance criteria into PRDs or into JIRA tickets. Why? Because I've traditionally worked in engineering and product management forward companies. So it'd be a lot more visible than say like a design Google Doc. And even if someone doesn't know about accessibility, it's there and visible that someone can come ask me like, hey, what does it mean to have an ARIA label? Like, ooh, is this, you know, you said that the color contrast doesn't matter here. See, now I'm bringing it up, but, you know, and those are the things where an accessibility specialist can say, oh yeah, like, great question. This is a nuanced thing. I don't expect you to know it. But like this, it can help do the teaching in a way that's not, I'm going to sit in front of my computer and do this mandatory compliance module, and I'm going to hate my life for the next 30 minutes. Because there's also, you know, the setting can really influence how we learn and how we retain the information we've learned.
Yeah, I think those are really important features when it comes to like getting education going. I might just shift a little bit to kind of stuff. I worked at a company that had a really old accessibility program. So I had the privilege of being able to, you know, work on a team of 13, and you know, what we did, it was really cool to watch the actual changes from when I started and when I left. So like, I remember when I started the mobile accessibility program getting like yelled at on the phone, to when I left being contacted 3 months before a project even kicked off. Hey, we want you to come check out the accessibility. We're concerned about this for mobile. Just a huge change in attitude. And some of the things that we found to be really successful was, first of all, a champions group. So the accessibility people internally giving little, you know, base level snippets to kind of representatives of the different departments. And then those people were responsible to spread that knowledge. So we were able to give topics on like, this is why you underline your links. I never want to say it again. This is why you should use checkboxes versus radio buttons. I never want to tell you that again. And it worked. And people took that knowledge back. And like I said, we didn't have to unmute. Another really great resource was we worked with TPG, which is now TPGI, to make an internal cookbook of accessibility. So we found things that we had issues with that we saw all the time, and built up a cookbook. And we were able to send resources like, hey, check this out. This is our cookbook. We built it. Check it out. Another thing that we built was it was like a cookbook for spec work. So this is why we made the decisions on the framework that we did for accessibility. And we found that a lot of the resources really, they saved our time, because accessibility specialists and inclusive designers are often stretched so thin. And being able to have those resources available, we saw it cut down on a lot of our backlogs. It cut down on we had like an area where people could reach out with questions. It cut down on those questions, or we were able to give somebody who had just joined the team, who was still kind of getting ramped up, access, and they just were able to send links that were all there for them. Obviously for training purposes, for new employees, it was great all around. So if you guys are ever, if anybody at your company is ever thinking like, should we have cookbooks? Should we have internal resources? I can tell you it made a huge, huge difference. So I, huge proponent for that.
Oh, those are so exciting. I just sort of like, I'm already like, I got my pencil out, taking notes from you all. Thank you so much. Yeah, one role in particular, I know we've already touched on, just sort of as the role of a product designer. How can one be a product designer and advocate for accessibility? Anna, I'll direct this one to you.
Yeah, I think, the other panelists or other fantastic panelists have already touched on some of the things I'll mention here, but, I think a single product designer cannot holistically influence accessibility alone in an organization. That is not me trying to say don't try. That is me saying it needs to come from leadership. And so when I say all of this, how can a product designer, advocate for accessibility? What I want to emphasize is that the biggest thing they can do is teach others in their teams and gather other folks in the organization to start building awareness, because that's, I might be biased. That's what I've approached it as, and so it doesn't always work, right? Some organizations don't buy in, and sometimes it's not, it's not you, it just happens. But you can still show people how accessibility comes up in day to day. You can take a component that you're using and say, hey, notice these things that we could off the bat just look at and improve. There's some documentation we could clarify. We don't want to use checkboxes for these things. We want to use radio buttons. And so smaller stuff like that can have a big impact. And so again, I think when it comes to being a product designer and making accessibility a part of your practice, do everything you can and know that it's going to be limited unless you got some support from leadership. Build your guilds, build folks, find folks who are interested in the same thing and advocate together, and do the best you can together. Just know that this is a movement, not a singular independent thing. We need as many people bought into this as possible. We need it to go beyond your team. We need it to go beyond your organization. We need it to happen across the board. And that's one of the beautiful things about accessibility is it's not a I own this thing. It's everybody needs to do this because it's a human right. And so advocacy is power no matter who you are or what you do. Just know that, I say this again and again, there's going to be pushback. It's not, if an organization's not supporting it, you can't do it all alone. Just remember that, because I needed to hear that, I've needed to hear that before.
I totally agree with everything you said, Anna. I think accessibility is an interesting field to work in. I think when you work in a field that involves like human rights, you of course hold it very near to your heart. So many people in this field themselves have a disability or are very close to people with disabilities. So it's hard not to take something that's part of your like self-identity and kind of take it so personally. But I think it's a recipe for burnout to work in an organization that does not prioritize accessibility and try to turn the tide on your own. There's definitely something to be said for grassroots movements. I think as one person, you can get your coworkers excited. You can help them out with your own work, with their work. You can make accessibility a part of your own work. But I think ultimately, there needs to be organizational buy-in for things to kind of go the distance and to be sustainable and for there to be real long-term incentives. And I think as one person, if it's really, really important to you, like Anna said, you can get together a group of people who find it important as well and make a case to leadership to support. But just remember to like protect your own health and also like the things that are important to you. It's really hard to argue with people that you deserve to exist, that you deserve to have rights. So just remember that and go where you're valued. If it's accessibility is something that's really important to you and it's something that you cannot do without in your life, then go somewhere that values that and turn the tide that way with like-minded people.
And I want to double down on a theme that both of you are bringing up, which is the human aspect of it, and of danger of working in accessibility as we get so caught up with the technical checklist of like, oh, I need to make sure that it's keyboard and screen reader and the color contrast works and all of this. And in our excitement and well-intentions, we miss the human element. And it's really important, particularly if you're able-bodied, if you are cisgendered, if you are white, and you don't have those perspectives in your immediate life. You know, a lot of my learning when I first started working in accessibility design was just learning more about the disability community. Because, you know, yes, I may know someone who relies on a wheelchair and they are not the spokesperson for the entire community, which is 15% of the world population, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And when we start falling into, dare I say it, hot take, the medical model of disability, that's how we get companies who purchase accessibility overlays and then are suddenly wondering why people are mad at them that they're not being accessible when they purchased a product that said it was going to be. So, you know, prior to maybe getting into all the technicalities, read like blog posts, watch movies, listen to people who are disabled. If you have a disability employee resource group or business resource group, affinity group in your organization, go in and ask how you can help. That, you know, when I first started working in A11Y, that was a group who I went to and was humbled right away. And realizing that there is a difference between I'm an accessibility advocate because I want to improve my own career and I want to launch something at the, you know, I say it's for community, but I'm actually working out of individualism at the end of the day, versus I want to take the entire community with me and make technology better, or make it the way that it should have been the first time around if we lived in a society that wasn't ableist, wasn't elitist. So some resources that I can give off the top of my head, Disability Visibility, fantastic book. Demystifying Disability is another one. Sherry Bryn-Haber, hi, you're great, fantastic blog writer. I don't know how she does it, but there are so many people who we can learn from, and Google is free, that we can get so much farther without having to further extract spoons, emotional labor, and exploit the disability community, which unfortunately is common even in our practice.
Ooh, this last round of answers felt so rich. Thank you all for just sharing so much of your own human feelings and stories. And we'll be really excited to just sort of share out some of the resources after this talk. A bunch of great recommendations in there. Appreciated. So for the next section of the panel, I would love to just hear some of your favorite love to hate accessibility myths, and just sort of like, and actually just get to debunk them. And just so, yeah, what is something that you've heard in common and just sort of would like to take this space to give us your own truth.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I see you starting.
When I used to do accessibility audits, I'd get emails being like, here's this website, can you run it through the accessibility checker? And I'm like, I'm the accessibility checker. There is no such thing as automated checkers that can catch every accessibility issue. It does not exist. Technology is not out there. It's a person, it's people. People need to catch most accessibility issues out there. And we need to become comfortable with, like, as practitioners, that we need to engage with the work ourselves. Like Alexis was saying, there's no formula for accessibility. Like a good chunk of it is just listening to people, testing the things manually. But yes, again, there's no such thing as automating accessibility. It does not exist. Do not buy that overlay. It won't work.
I love that one with the combination of just sort of like, yeah, how you get your whole team thinking about accessibility too, just sort of like really getting to be part of that human process.
Yeah, I guess I can go. We kind of spoke about mine a little bit about like the concept of one person, like just one human cannot change the inside. I think that's a huge one that I want to, keep debunking is that like we're quoting a lot of Matt May, but he has a lot of good quotes, but like you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm in the concept of like, it's coming from a really personal place because I'm going through burnout. Like I'm going through the grips of like we're talking cannot work burnout. It is debilitating. So accessibility, it is a really high burnout place. And I think the one myth that I want to say is for me is like sometimes you can't win. And that's okay. And not everything is your fault. I think the big thing is accessibility specialists. And when I do mentoring and when I talk to people, they blame themselves for the failures of upper management, and they blame themselves for the failure of their managers. Like you should have been protected from that as an accessibility specialist. Your head is not on a platter. You're not, at the guillotine. Like you cannot. Oftentimes we treat accessibility specialists like not only are they saving companies from $9 million lawsuits, but it's also their fault if there's anything that's not accessible. And that's the factory for burnout, where you're, all the weight's on your shoulders, sustained stress. So I think for me, if it doesn't come from the top, it's not your fault. And if you feel that you're just in a losing battle at your company, no one's taking you seriously, you can't get any traction, no one cares, it's okay to leave. It's not failing, it's protecting your own mental health and protecting yourself. I've talked to so many people where I was like, listen, it's just not going to happen there. It's better to leave. And I have friends who have left companies you would think are doing great with accessibility, but actually treat their accessibility specialists really horribly. So there are jobs, like I have worked jobs where you are treated with respect, you are treated well, and I still burnt out. And it's okay if you're feeling soulless at your job. And there are plenty of places that are desperate and really actually want someone to come make change, and they've made space for that and are looking for talent. So I would say, don't stick at a company because you think, oh, maybe it'll get better next week, maybe it'll get better next week, because sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's a huge myth for accessibility, where it's like it's your fault. So I don't know, that's my soapbox about burnout and companies, where it's like there are good places to work, I promise.
I think to build on that, and I'm going to diverge from what I was going to originally kind of mention in this one, but I think, accessibility as a practice, inclusive design as a practice, I think a lot of us are getting burned out in ways that other parts of other tech industry aren't. I think some of that's due to the nature of the work and the efforts that we put in. I also think that it's in part due to how organizations right now tend to be structuring their accessibility orgs. I think that, one thing, if I could get organizational awareness around this more, is that accessibility across an organization can't be just a team of two. It can't be a team of three. It needs to be, we need folks, everyone, right, to have a baseline knowledge about accessibility and inclusion. And we need a solid team, the same way you would need a team with any other prioritization. You wouldn't have a team of two for privacy for a 1,000-person, 2,000-person org. You would have a much larger team. And so I think, and perhaps I'm being a little spicy on this one, but like it right now, our burnout is in part due to the lack of proper allocation on resources, time, and team members that we absolutely need to succeed at an organizational level. And so I would like to see, if there are any leaders here thinking about building out that org, keep advocating for more team members, for more time. And because there's so much that we can do when we have the proper resources. So that's what I'll say. One myth is that it can live in a team of 2 or 3 people for a huge org. We need way more folks to do that.
Yeah, sorry to quickly jump right back in real quick for the statement of accessibility is not a monolith. Like there are so many things. And I think one thing that I loved of my previous team is we jokingly referred to ourselves as Voltron because there are so many different facets. Like my background is in user experience design. I have a degree in UX. I focus on the design side. People on my team, they had dev backgrounds. We had people who came from government and they had amazing document accessibility, Excel accessibility, web accessibility. There are so, and then like even mobile, there are so many different facets. And to expect someone to know everything, I totally agree with Anna. Like we wouldn't do it for privacy. We wouldn't do it for, compliance, for like, legality things. Why are we doing it for accessibility? So, we need a big team of people with a diverse background of knowledge and diverse people, and especially disabled people in those teams as well.
I love all these. I'm going to go back to the individual perspective. And I think one myth or something that folks tell themselves a lot is, I have to know everything about accessibility before I can advocate for it. And you don't. Like, we, as folks who have accessibility as part of our job, former, current, future job titles, we don't know everything. There are people who have been doing this job for 25 years or more than years than any of us have been on this planet in this panel, and they still don't know everything. Like, it's really important to take a step forward. I'm trying to figure out a non-physical metaphor right now, but none are coming to mind. Like, it's an incremental journey, and be prepared to mess up. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, by nature of learning and doing something that you've never done before. I think as a society, we get so caught up in perfectionism and needing to do it right the first time that we are like in fear and never do anything. And I argue that that's what got us here in the first place. Like, I am thinking about an organization who may not have a huge tech debt mountain of accessibility bugs. And I'm like, I don't think there is, and if you continue shipping product, like, you will inevitably have bugs. So I think, remove the perfectionism, remove the ego, talk to folks and how to appropriately apologize, especially, if you might say something that can come off as really off-putting to a customer. I'll give you an example. I was on a customer call with an engineer some time ago, and we were talking to a blind screen reader user, and this engineer said, well, if you look at the bottom left corner of the screen, and I'm like, oh my God, again, it's inevitable that something will happen, you will mess up, and it's how you pick yourself back up. It's how you recover. It's how you learn that you will become a better practitioner. But don't let the fear and perfectionism prevent you from starting that journey.
I totally agree so much. Sorry, Rachel. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Alexis. I think as an accessibility practitioner, inclusive designer, like accessibility professional for focus on development, the best thing you can do is develop like your listening skills. Listen to disabled people about their experiences. Listen to disabled people from multiple backgrounds. Don't just listen to white disabled people. Don't just listen to white disabled men. Like, listen to disabled people, hear what they need, and do your best to facilitate like the best experience for them.
Thank you all for pulling us in to be better listeners and more thoughtful builders. Learned a ton from you on this panel. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, it has now come to the end of our live stream. So for some closing thoughts, thank you all so much for speaking. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you missed some of the links that we shared, don't worry. We'll include a whole collection of just sort of resources that you all have shared, and then follow-up email this week, along with a recording for people who've signed up for the webinar. And then also to check out more Figma live streams, you can head to figma.com/events. All of our live streams are recorded. So even if for folks who didn't make it live, you can have your coworkers, friends sign up to receive the recording. And then finally, if you have ideas or suggestions on topics, we're always available via email at community@figma.com. Oh, and then actually finally, as a reminder, if you have questions for today's panelists from the stream, feel free to send them over Twitter using the hashtag Figma A11Y stream. Thank you all so much, and see you for the next one. Appreciate it.